Hello, and welcome to the Community Church of New York. My name is Gerald Brown. I'm talking to you from my Upper West Side apartment in Manhattan. I am Director of Music at Community Church. I've held that position since January of 1990. But way back in 1978, I played for 9 summers as a substitute musician. Again, I want to welcome you to the service and we certainly hope that you enjoy it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Community Church of New York. We are a multiracial, multicultural, multi-generational congregation, and we're very happy that you are with us today. I am Brenda Schroeb, our worship associate. Online worship feels different from worship when we are together, but the spirit of our connections remain the same. Reverend Peggy Clark, our senior minister, is presiding today. Also on our worship team, we have with us Anthony Cruz, one of our intern ministers, and Amy Wilson, who is our tech. Our topic is reparations, the cost of justice. Please make yourselves comfortable and ready for our worship together. We'll begin with our opening hymn, Where Do We Come From? In the Teal Hymnum number 1003.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from?
Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery.
Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going?
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going?
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going?
Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going?
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going?
Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery.
It's good to see you all. Before we begin, can I just apologize for my voice? Some of you know that I have a cyst on a vocal cord, which should have been treated last summer, but of course has been put on hold. And some days are fine, but then there are some days where I feel like my voice is a little difficult. So this is one of those days. So today we're talking about reparations, about repairing relationship, about restitution. This is not an easy subject, and really, I don't want to make it easy, right? This work is hard. At the same time, I'm aware that the case for reparations can inspire the telling of a painful history. So before we begin, I just want to assure you that I am not doing that today. I am never shy about our collective story, but I'm not rehearsing American trauma this morning. I think we've all really had enough trauma. We do continue to celebrate Black History Month, and today marks the 56th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, the powerful and transformational Black leader. So we will use his words as our call to worship this morning. He told us, "You can't separate peace from freedom, because no one can be at peace until they have freedom." And it is with those words that we begin today. Let's breathe deeply in gratitude and enter this time of worship. We'll start with our sung chalice lighting.
Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy. Rise up, O flame, bright light flame, by thy light glory, show to us beauty, vision, and joy.
We light our chalice. Please bring it near to you. And as it is our custom, let us recite our chalice lighting. We light this candle, the flame of our heritage. May it ignite hope in our lives, in our community, and in the world.
Please join me as we say our unison affirmation. Unto the Church Universal, which is the depository of all ancient wisdom and the school of all modern thought, which recognizes in all prophets a harmony, in all scriptures a unity, and through all dispensations a continuity, which abjures all that separates and divides, and always magnifies humanity and peace, which seeks truth and freedom, justice in love, and individual discipline in social duty, and which shall make of all persons one beloved community, unto this church and to all its members, known and unknown throughout the world, we pledge the allegiance of our hands and hearts.
Dear community, let us now be unmuted and greet one another. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, Miss
Hello.
Angel.
Morning,
Good morning.
everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Yeah, that's okay.
Where's everybody?
Andy.
Hi.
Hi, Melinda.
Hi.
Hi,
Hey, hi,
Melanie.
Paul. All right, good stuff
Hi,
there.
Althea. Hi, Althea.
Patty, hi.
Good morning.
Everyone.
Maureen.
Hi.
Hi, Miss Teresa. Hi, Val.
Hi, Heidi. I don't know, see you, but I know you were there.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Rose. I think we're
Hi.
gonna have to.
Wow, the energy in this room is amazing. Let us channel this energy, these intentions, as we prepare our hearts for the work of reparation, repairing the bridges of communication with ourselves first, with our neighbors, with our communities, and always recognizing that this work is ongoing. It is the continued undoing and unlearning that can allow the pathways to repair our human relationships. As we continue the creation of this container, please share with us in the chat your joys and concerns, the names, experiences, and words that make our process flourishing, that make our process liberating, and that recognizes the ongoing challenge of our human experience. We pray for Ari, a young adult with a fragile health. Paul Schilling and family, the people in Texas, that they may recover. For Kevin's daughter, Laura, and her husband, Elliot, celebrating their marriage. Brian Paston, Sam Kearns and family, Taplima, and all those being afflicted with COVID. May the names that we have shared in community help us continue this journey. Inspire us in this work of reparation in this work of liberation?
I usually start sermons with a story. What story should I start with today? The story that begins in 1619 when the first African slave was brought to our shores. It's good to remember when he was caught, when all those slaves were caught, they weren't slaves. They were teachers, and doctors, and merchants. They were mothers and fathers and children. Do we start with their stories? Or maybe we start with the millions of people who were enslaved for generations, who survived under the harshest conditions with no chance of escape, who watched their children and their children's children suffer for the benefit of a white ruling class that institutionalized dominance for profit. Or is the retelling of those stories too traumatic, too much pain for a simple sermon? Maybe we start with Reconstruction, those few years when balance was restored, when money and power were redistributed. Unless we don't know that story. Maybe the only story we know is the retelling, the rewriting, the whitewashing of that time, so that the rise of Black people from the ashes of slavery gets forgotten. We may not even know the story of Black landowners and lawmakers, the many stories of people who regrouped and reimagined, because history was retold so that we would forget. Maybe those are the stories, the forgotten stories, the stories of the massacre in Tulsa and the erasure of Black Wall Street. Maybe we should start there if we want to understand the generations of suffering that continue, the systematic deprivation of justice perpetrated since our nation's founding. Maybe we should just talk about the parallel stories, the ones where white people are on a steady trajectory as they step on the necks of Black people to boost them up. Not on purpose. Not for most of us. Most of us would never. I can hear your voices telling me. I can hear the voices of good white people I know telling me they would never. I can hear the stories white people want to tell. We want to talk about marching in Selma and integrating schools and Black Lives Matter. We want to talk about our own histories. I can hear my ancestors telling me that we were oppressed, that we were poor, that we weren't even here when so much happened. We weren't here. I don't know when or in what context I first heard about reparations, but I do remember my response. Fear. I was young and broke, which I know because my fear came from a place of feeling like I don't have enough. And I was afraid I was going to be asked to give something up. At the same time, in that same moment, I knew that reparations were the path toward justice, the way we could make restitution for harm done, and possibly the only way the nation would heal, which is why I was afraid. I didn't have anything to give, so how could I find the money owed? So much is owed, and I don't know how to pay it or what's left of me if I do. I've since learned and moved to a different place in understanding, but I'm guessing that response is where a lot of white people land, even if they aren't actively worried about paying the rent as I was at the time. Most people don't feel like they have extra to give, and most white people don't feel personally responsible for the historic injustice perpetrated on Black people over the last 400 years. Here in New York, most white people trace their lineage overseas. We showed up after most of the damage was done, and we didn't have any power until recently anyway. We can't be held accountable for a system we had no part in creating. I can hear my Jewish ancestors say that they paid enough, that their wealth was stolen from them, and no one's offering to pay them back. You might hear those voices too. I trace my lineage to Austria, Russia, and Sicily, all places my ancestors suffered terribly. They were dangerously poor, experienced generations of oppression and horrific violence. And one day we might need to have a conversation about that, but not today. And more to the point, my ancestors got out. They had an option and they took it, and they found themselves here, where for a time their poverty continued, but not for too long. Within 2 or 3 generations, it was nothing but a memory, because my ancestors came here, where this system was designed to help them. Well, they weren't considered white at first, but they had a chance to assimilate, which is its own form of violence, but again, for another time. And the American system was so committed to the disenfranchisement of Black people that it was willing to let those of us with white skin into the halls of opportunity and power, as long as we didn't challenge the systems of dominance, which at first we didn't. Those opportunities never existed for Black people for 400 years, for generations and generations after that. Even now, we know the system isn't designed to help Black people. So the reason the system is still so broken, still so biased, still so racist, is that we avoid the conversation necessary to change it. Some white people are afraid of Black anger. Some white people carry shame, even if they don't carry situational guilt. Some white people have so much anger of their own at a capitalist system that hasn't worked for them that they can't begin to care about justice for anyone else. But this is a conversation we need to have anyway. And as although white people look to hide their wallets, let me assure you, this conversation isn't about the cash in your pocket. This conversation is about institutional integrity. It's about recognizing a painful, completely shameful, and horrifically violent past. It's about learning our real history, about fearless confrontation with who we've been as a nation. It's about seeking reconciliation between those who have benefited from the system and those the system hurt. It's about seeking equilibrium, finding our balance as a unified people. We can't expect to jump to forgiveness if we can't name the crime. Frankly, that's exactly what the left is trying to tell the right about the attack on the Capitol. We need accountability. We need to know that there's a consequence when a system creates the opportunity for violence. Without that, we don't have justice. Without that, we don't have peace. And here in this country, we don't have peace and never will until we start talking about accountability for our own history, our own crime. Do you know that Arkansas, Iowa, and Mississippi are trying to make it illegal to teach the 1619 Project in schools? In his landmark article on reparations for the Atlantic, Ta-Nehisi Coates writes, "The crime with which reparations activists charge the country implicates more than just a few towns or corporations. The crime indicts the American people themselves at every level and in nearly every configuration. A crime that implicates the entire American people deserves its hearing in the legislative body that represents them." He goes on, "No one can know what would come of such a debate. Perhaps no number can fully capture the multi-century plunder of Black people in America. Perhaps the number is so large it can't be imagined, let alone calculated and dispensed. But I believe that wrestling publicly with these questions matters as much as, if not more than, the specific answers that might be produced. An America that asks what it owes its most vulnerable citizens is improved and humane. An America that looks away is ignoring not just the sins of the past, but the sins of the present and the certain sins of the future. More important than any single check cut to any African American, the payment of reparations would represent Americans' maturation out of the childhood myth of its innocence into a wisdom worthy of its founders. Conversation about reparations isn't about money, it's about truth. And the process of having the conversation is holy work. We don't talk about sin in this denomination. We don't believe in original sin, the idea that we were all born bad. We talk about original blessing. We talk about forgiveness. We rejected hell and divine retribution a long time ago. The consequence is that we gloss over our own brokenness and slide into the love that reconciles us, which is where most of our conversations happen. The racism, the system of white supremacy that has saturated our nation is sinful. It is our original sin, and we have lived in the state of brokenness ever since. There is a fragmentation in our very foundation, and the only way we're going to be whole is if we fix it. This is the spiritual work of our time. It is our religious task. If we're going to be a people of integrity, we have to have this very difficult conversation about what was stolen and how we might be able to pay it back. I agree with Coates. There's a legislative conversation that should happen. It's necessary for the soul of the nation, and coincidentally, it is happening. A bill went to the floor this week for debate. But there are other conversations that can and should happen in smaller forums like ours. One of the UU professional organizations is asking churches to offer employees of color paid time off after they experience racism at work. Give them a personal day or two to recover. It's an interesting idea and a conversation I hope we have. But the ideas shouldn't come from me. This week, I'm recommending to the board that we start an 8th Principle project team that will be tasked with moving the 8th Principle into our church life. One of the things I'm hoping that team will consider is what this church can do to heal. How do we find our balance? I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. If I were, I'd lay out a rational argument proven by history, dotted by international precedent. No, what I'm trying to do is invite all of us, into a discussion about suffering and about justice and about grace. I say often, this is where we practice being human and learn how to be our best selves. It's spiritual work and it can't be done alone. Periodically, a member will tell me that my sermons are too religious or spiritual, or that there's too much or too little justice talk. And my response is always the same, regardless of which side of the too much, too little you're on. I send a list of sermon titles from the last few months and maybe for the next few months, and I point out that it's pretty evenly split. The same is true for music styles or God language. I'm fairly intentional about offering something for everyone, even though that does mean not everyone gets, or really that nobody gets everything. But I've been wondering if it's going to change. Not because I'm going to preach more on this or that, but because I'm really seeing our justice work tied together so tightly with our spiritual work that I'm not sure how well I can discern the boundaries between the two anymore. If we are fully engaging our deepest spiritual selves, we are manifesting justice in the world. And if we are fully engaging questions of justice, we are doing profoundly spiritual work. I suppose it's worth noting that neither justice work nor an authentic spiritual search are comfortable. So those questions and requests might be more about noting the discomfort. That alone is part of the work, just sitting with it. The point is the unearthing of white supremacy, the dismantling of institutional racism, the seeking balance through reparations, and the articulation and possible rewriting of our theologies of sin and evil and forgiveness and grace are central to our becoming. The story I start this sermon with isn't nearly as important as the one we're setting ourselves up to tell next. We're getting ready in more ways than one to rewrite the future of this church. What happened before must be reconciled so that we can move forward as a people in balance with ourselves and with each other. For the sake of the nation, for the sake of the past and the sake of the future, for the integrity of every American, it's time to have the difficult conversation about reparations so that we can repair our fragmentations and bring us all into wholeness.
Whether we are whether we are together in body or in spirit, we are always one community, a single church with a shared mission and a vision of a world grounded in welcome and equity. Even when we are online, we have many programs throughout the week to keep us connected to the world, to each other, and our deepest selves. At 3:00 this afternoon, leaders from the New Sanctuary Coalition will be with us to talk about the work of this groundbreaking organization and our ongoing partnership. We'll be here in this room and all are welcome. Next Sunday afternoon, the newly formed UU New York State Advocacy Network is having a public meeting, organizing meetings for UUs around the state. Reverend Peggy is a founding member of this network and is hoping Community Church will get involved with this work. The link in your weekly email is there, or you can email Reverend Peggy or Valerie Lynch after worship for it. On March 7th, our worship will focus on the 1-year anniversary of this pandemic. Reverend Peggy is collecting pictures of our lives this last year, things that demonstrate all that we did and didn't do as a result of the ongoing isolation. If you have pictures to contribute, please email them to her this week. We are a 7-day church with events and offerings through the week. Please check our website and our webpage for this week's schedule. It also remains true that we have bills to pay, and fundraising is a critical source of our income. If you are able, please consider donating as we pass a virtual basket during our postlude.
As we depart, please draw near your chalice and let us say together our words for extinguishing. Knowing how quickly the flame of truth may be extinguished, how easily the chalice of fellowship broken, let us be vigilant in faith, keep peace in our hearts, and make care for one another the watchword of our lives together. So our light goes out into the world.
Our light goes out to all the places love and healing are needed. Let us go in peace to love and serve the world and one another. Blessed be.